even for those of us that have done case investigation for the last several months, we still follow the case investigation form. And even as we move into PHIMS, I believe most people here are still using the case investigation form to guide their investigation, and then they input into PHIMS after the fact. Once you develop a level of comfort with the questions being asked, you may do some direct entry into PHIMS, but that's certainly not the expectation to start with. So I just want to highlight that the information on the form is all information that you'll need to acquire during your the course of your investigation. So it's not okay to skip over parts or just not ask specific parts. You need to make sure that you thoroughly go through the information. And so I would start my investigation by calling and asking, you know, for the cases by first name, and then I ask them to confirm 2 identifiers. This is super important. We know to do this in our work, but I just want to confirm that you are doing that. So we're going to confirm last name and birth date. I find that people are fairly resistant to providing other information like a number to us without us giving them other information first. So confirming last name and birth date. And then I usually ask them, you know, I'm calling, were you recently tested for COVID-19? Are you aware of your results? So there's some efforts to make sure that people are getting their test results in a timelier fashion, then we are able to call them for case investigation. And so I just confirm with them if they already are aware of their results. And then I follow up by saying, you know, I'm a public health nurse and my job is to do a case investigation. And as part of my case investigation, I look at, you know, where you could have gotten it from and anyone that you might have unknowingly passed it on to. And I do use the word unknowingly because I feel that it puts clients more at ease with the idea that we're not blaming them, it's not fault, they're not going to get in trouble because people are often afraid of that. And so just starting off very gently by saying, you know, anybody that you might have unknowingly passed it on to. And so usually they're fine with that, and then I'll start by confirming their address because we have had cases where, you know, they've moved and haven't changed their address with Manitoba Health, and so we may have somebody that's from another region, and then we're going to say, you know, I'm actually not the best person to do your case investigation because I'm not working living in, and so I'm going to pass this off to a nurse within your region to contact you. If they are within region, we're going to confirm their address and whether this is the best number to get a hold of them at. So we're going to update all that if there are any changes from what we have currently. And then we are going to ask them about their racial or ethnic identity. This question is not optional for us. So there are resources on Shared Health how to ask these questions. But we do need to make sure that we are asking this every time we do a case investigation. This is not optional, okay? And so I usually frame it as, you know, after I've confirmed their address and all of that information, can I just ask, what do you identify as your racial or ethnic background? I might give some examples of what, because people find that question can be confusing sometimes. I'll give them examples and then go from there. And then we move into so some of this investigation disposition. If we were filling out the forms, I would click off that it's pending because we're currently working on it. WRHA is responsible for it. If at the end we realize that this person actually has already completed their 10 days of isolation after their symptom onset, we could mark it as complete because they're already done. But for now, we're just going to assume that this person is still pending. We're still working on it. This is COVID-19, obviously, and it's lab confirmed. So everything that we're receiving is a lab confirmed case. Now, this most likely acquisition, the staging, we're not going to know this until we're a little bit deeper in our case investigation. And so I usually leave this blank and then I come back to it. You should be reviewing your case investigation forms, you know, anything that you've missed at the end of your conversation. And so then I usually move into asking them, can I just ask, when did you go for testing for COVID? And so they'll give me a date of when they went for testing, and then I usually follow up the question by, were you having symptoms of COVID when you went for testing? And so they may say yes or they may say no. And then I might ask them, what was the reason that you went for testing? So we can glean a fair bit of information right there. We do want to know whether they're symptomatic or not. And then they might say, the public health nurse told me to go get tested because I was a contact to another case. Okay, well, that already gives us a lot of information. So that's why I always ask, what was the reason that you went for testing? We have had some instances where somebody was asymptomatic on their test date, but has since become symptomatic after their testing. And that happens either when they just heard that they had been in contact with someone that was positive and they just went for testing without, on our advice or without our advice, and they haven't yet developed symptoms, but still end up coming back positive. So that can happen. I usually ask them, okay, now what were the symptoms that you were having? So I usually let them give me what their symptoms were that they were having. And then once they have kind of given me their symptoms, I say, okay, I know that you told me your symptoms. I'm just going to go through the rest of them, and I want you to tell me if you had any of these other symptoms, because some of them are a little bit tricky, and people don't realize that they could be symptoms of COVID. So in addition to this list that's here, I will ask about other things like loss of taste and smell, any unusual rashes, conjunctivitis, congestion, runny nose, fatigue. So all of those can be symptoms that are not included in this list here. So I do ask about those, and I'll put them in as the other. Okay. So once I've asked about symptoms, I will ask, now out of all those symptoms that we discussed, which one was the first symptom that you experienced, and when was that? Because we really want to be able to date it, so we need that onset date. If somebody has never had symptoms, so we do have that where people will say, I've never had symptoms, and I will go on to ask them about the symptom list, and sometimes they do have, some of those vague symptoms like headache, or, oh, I just had a little bit of a cough. So we hear that a lot. I just had a little cough and not a lot. And so they think that they haven't had symptoms, but then when you go through the symptom list, they have. But for someone that's truly asymptomatic, we're going to use their test date as their onset date because we don't have any other symptom to go by. And we do know that they were positive as of that date. So our onset date would be their testing date. But otherwise, we're going to use their onset, their earliest symptom. Okay. And then I usually move into, we go into the risk factor information, and I usually give them a date range. So if they said, say, my symptom onset date was October 14th, I'm going to move into the risk factors, and I'm going to say, I'm going to ask you some yes or no questions. So I feel like it's just a little bit easier to move into that kind of question. There's not a lot of detail, but just yes or no questions related to the 2 weeks before your symptoms started. And then I provide them with the date range. So from October 1st until October 13th, so we're not including the symptom onset date, the 2 weeks prior to that. Have you attended or gone any place that's been associated with an outbreak of cases of COVID-19? So I'll say, have you seen anything in the media about restaurants or anything like that that you have been to that have been associated with an outbreak of COVID? And so yes or no to that. Have they been in contact with any live animal markets? We rarely receive a yes answer for that. If they've been in contact to a new or previously diagnosed case of COVID-19. Now, lots of people will fill out yes for that and yes for contact with someone with similar illness. If you have answered yes that this person was diagnosed as COVID-19 and they are talking about the same person, you do not have to click yes for someone with similar illness. Where I use this box is somebody that has been ill but is not a confirmed case of COVID-19. So I've had yes for both where they were in contact with somebody that was positive and somebody else that is sick but was not diagnosed as COVID positive. Okay. And then exposure setting, if they've done any traveling. We always ask whether they're pregnant, if they're, even if it seems ridiculous based on their age, we just say, we have to ask, is there any chance that you're pregnant? And then rather than asking yes or no about their sensitive environment, I always ask them, do you work or go to school? And it's either yes or no. I don't like to ask, what do you do for work? It's assuming that somebody is working. I just say, Do you go to work or school? And then I ask them just some just beginner details about that. Okay, where is it that you work? What is your role there? Okay. And so then they might not be a high-risk employment, so I would say no, but I want the details of their employment, and we'll get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of that. I'm going to ask them about underlying illness, so I do list off. I use simpler terms than the ones that are here, like heart, liver, lung, kidney disease, and that kind of thing, and yes or no. So that's pretty straightforward. When I'm asking about smoking, I ask about smoke, vaping, using cannabis, or hookah. Hookah has been one that in some of our population has been pretty popular. So, and there have been a fair number of cases associated with some of the restaurants that have hookah or the hookah bars. Not recently, but previously, and so that's been one that we've started including when we're questioning the risk factors. So that's kind of straightforward. So I feel like that's not, those questions are not daunting for the client. And then I move into some of the more specific questions related to their acquisition and their transmission. Now, normally, or in the past, we would collect very detailed information about their acquisition exposures. Just based on the volume of work now, and we know that there is widespread community transmission of COVID, we are less specific now in our acquisition exposures. And that's on the direction of some of the medical officers of health, that we can, just use a simplified version of documenting our acquisition exposures. So what we really want to know about are significant exposures. So I will tell people, we're looking at the 2-week period of time leading up to the date of symptom onset, so not including the symptom onset. I would like to go through with you and talk about, the different places where you could have been, where you would have been in contact with other people within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, had that close prolonged contact. And so I usually try to prompt them by saying, especially large events, so weddings, funerals, family gatherings, anything like that. I also ask them about, attending any restaurants or, community sites where that they might have been in contact with a lot of people. And I do say to them, driving through a Tim Hortons to grab a coffee, I don't need to know about if you stopped in at Shoppers and you wore a mask and you didn't have any significant contact with anybody else. I'm not going to include that in this part. Previously, we would have had pages of acquisitions because we were really trying to narrow down and be able to link cases one to the other. Now, just with the volume of cases that we have, and we know that it's widespread, some of those smaller details are not as significant. So if, say, in the acquisition, the person says, I went to a wedding. So I might have, and I'm going to start typing in, I haven't typed in otherwise, but I'm going to type in here how I would normally structure my acquisition. So if they live with anybody else, I always have household first. If they live alone, I'm less concerned, unless they happen to live in a congregate setting. So we do have like some 55 plus buildings or even apartment buildings where I might want to include that if it's important information about that. But if I usually include something about household. So so just some details about that, and then I would date it. So if I'm using the example of October 14th being the onset of symptoms for this person, I'm going to date it back 2 weeks from there. So it would be, I'll pull out my calendar here so I can see. Oh, so it would be September 30th. Or 13th. Assuming that they see their partner and their kids every day. The next one, so that would be community and household, and then community. And so then I usually put something about work or education setting if they're a student. So say this person, as a server at Earls on Main. And then I'd put in details in here. So this is kind of where you need to really do a little bit of digging. So in any setting that they provide you, you're going to want to dig a little bit further. So I will ask, do you wear masks? Are the tables distanced? What do you do with your colleagues? So do you maintain distancing from your colleagues at all times? During break time, how do you guys manage that? Do you have a break room or do you not? Is it shared space? Is it marked for distance? That kind of thing. So you really need to do a fair bit of digging just to find out some of those details. So, so say for the server at Earls on Main, I might put something like PHIMS, contains, yep. Okay, so really any details that you have, you would want to put in there. And then I might put details about their work. So I might put, you know, works Thursday to Saturday, weekly. So I would just include whatever details that you have, and then I would put the date range. So if you know they only worked specific shifts during their acquisition, you can put the date range for those shifts. You don't have to put a specific, a separate acquisition for each date that they worked. You can kind of lump them all together that way and just simplify and just put the date range for when they were working. Worked for their full acquisition on every Thursday to Saturday. Okay, and then I'm going to add another community contact that this person attended outdoor wedding. So people any details that you have there. So, you know, whether there's distancing, if there's masking, whether there was a dance floor or not. And really, like I said, we're trying to really focus in on any big events that would have put them at risk for COVID. If they had contact with somebody that they had that was a known case, or you have kind of a very strong suspicion of where they got COVID from, obviously you're going to focus on that, and you're not going to spend a lot of time on other acquisitions. But it's just, we're looking at those big events. So workplace, households, contacts with known cases, and then kind of large community events. So you could date this as well. So they attended on, and you could put the times they were there or any other details that you. And so we're not going to spend tons more time on the acquisitions. I usually don't do a lot of teaching around interventions until the end. I move straight from acquisitions into transmission, and then I come back. And I do toggle or go up and down in my case investigation to make sure that I have everything covered. And so I'm okay to move past this and then come back to it. If that breaks your workflow, or you're more comfortable moving into their isolation, you absolutely can address it at that time. And so we know that isolation is from the beginning of their symptom onset, so 10 days from symptom onset. We did just receive direction this morning from our CD coordinators, because we had received some kind of differing information. If their symptoms start after test date, we are going to calculate their acquisition 2 weeks back from their testing date, so the 14 days prior to their testing date. But for their isolation, we need to calculate 10 days after their symptoms started. Okay. And if you have questions about that or have a problem with that, certainly you can address it with the CD coordinators. That's just the direction that was given to us today. That is not what we were doing previously, but that is the direction going forward. So for people that develop symptoms after test date, that for their isolation, we are going to go from their symptom onset. If they still have not had any symptoms by the time we're getting a hold of them and they've remained asymptomatic, then we are going to calculate their 10 days from their isolation date. From their test date. And so if we were filling this out, I would click off isolation. This person is home isolating. The dates of their isolation. So this person has symptom onset date of the 14th, and their end date will be the 24th. I just find that it flows better to talk when we're talking about dates and trying to recall dates, not to stop to talk about isolation. Isolation. And so I'm going to move into transmission, then we can come back to some of that teaching about isolation. So for transmission, again, because it's easy to forget household and workplace unless they truly have not had any contact or did not attend work even during the 2 days before their symptom onset. I always try to start with those so I don't forget them. So I'm going to add household first. Transmission mirrors the acquisition. You can include some of the details like I included above or not. And our exposure start date, so we're going to go from 2 days before their symptom onset until whenever they started isolating from their household. And if they have not been isolating, it's going to be today because we're going to tell them to isolate. So for this person that became symptomatic on the 14th, their exposure start date to their family is going to be 2 days before that. So the transmission period, so when they're infectious to other people, is a total of 12 days. And so we've seen where errors are made when you calculate back 2 days, and then where people will calculate 10 days from there. So it's not from the 12th until the 22nd, it's from the 12th all the way until the 24th, so 10 days after symptom onset. And so say I'm talking to this person today, and they have not been isolating from their family, I would put today's date, and I said this person lives with their partner and 2 kids, so we would have 3 high-risk contacts in that setting. I'm going to include workplace, so this person is a server at Earls. I would include the same details like I did above about their workplace, and I would include, so you're going to date it for the last date of their workplace. So if they worked during their transmission and the last shift that they worked, so you're going to date it. And then based on the information that I had provided above, and I will copy and paste because that's what I usually do, and that's the benefit of using an electronic form. And into your acquisitions, or into your transmission. The same information, and you would put the dates that this person worked during their transmission. And based on the information here, I'm not identifying any high-risk contacts. Their contact with clients is going to be, minimal interactions. They're being masked. They're maintaining as much distance as they can while they're taking orders. They're dropping off food. So not a lot of interaction, not that close, prolonged contact. And based on the information they provided about their interactions with their colleagues, and that's why we explore those, cleaning they do, what sort of personal protective equipment they use, how much interaction they have, that kind of thing, their break time. I haven't identified any high-risk contacts for this setting, so I would just put 0, or you could put NA. And I can't even remember what I dated that wedding as. I think it falls outside of the transmission window, so I put October 4th, so that's fine. But you would explore, so I asked them to focus on those dates in particular. Acquisition is important, but it's not as important for our work, especially right now, as these transmission exposures. And what I will do occasionally is I will give them some time and I will call them back. So I do find that that's helpful. I will say, you know, do you want me to give you 10 or 15 minutes? I'll give them the specific date range that I'm looking for. So from October 12th until today, and I give them the criteria. I want to know where you have been, where you would have been, you know, in contact within 6 feet of for 15 minutes or more of somebody else, okay? And so I'll say, I'm going to give you a bit of time. What I want you to do is look at your calendar, access, you know, your social media, your text messages, your visa statements, whatever it is that you need to do to try and recall where you've been. And then I will call you back in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, to go through that information with you. Some people are far more detailed than others, and that's okay, but we do try to do the best that we can to prompt them to do some of that recall with us. Okay. So once they've identified their contacts with you, I do a combination of filling out the form and I write on paper, just because filling out transmission events and acquisition events as quickly as they can come flying at you sometimes is too much. So I do write on scrap paper and then fill out the form after the fact. And that's okay to do too. Often there are more contacts of, you know, the 3 contacts on a page. So you couldn't fit all the information there anyways, sometimes for the number of contacts, so I will just rewrite it on my page. Or sometimes, you know, I'll ask them, could you just send me names and phone numbers by email? So they don't use anything in the subject line, or they'll just, you know, that kind of thing. So then I would fill this out with name. Often we don't have any of the information. They might only have a first name and a phone number. And then we would start an end date based on their interaction. So if this was a household setting, we're going to use the same dates that we had up in our transmission event. So say I'm going to just name this person, because I think I said Okay, guys, are you guys able to see my training screen here for PHIMS? I just want to highlight at the top of the screen here, so I will be using PHIMS training, but your PHIMS help should be here. So if you're looking for QRCs related to COVID, I can actually click into here just to show you what that looks like. But those will help you through the workflow of how to enter into PHIMS. Your training material is here, so all your QRCs for COVID-19 are here. Okay. And there are a lot of them. So if you're somebody that loves QRCs, they're here for your pleasure. There is dedicated PHIMS support, I believe, for this 2-week period of time from Robert DeRosier and Melody Harlick. And so I'm not sure if that information has been forwarded to you guys about how to get in contact with them, with the PHIMS team, if you have questions related to entering into PHIMS, but they are there to support you. So there are some people that are pretty proficient in PHIMS entry out in the community area, and I encourage you to try and access your peer support before you reach out to them, but certainly they are there as well to support your entry into PHIMS. So I'm just going to go back to my PHIMS training. Okay. And so I am just going to be using one of these fake cases here. So I'm going to toggle under investigations, and I am going to search for my case. And so this is where it's really helpful if you've filled out your case investigation form, if that's how you want to work, just to be able to do your PHIMS data entry after the fact. I like to work direct into PHIMS as I'm going and then just write notes on a page and then finish filling out PHIMS. I don't bother with the form anymore, but certainly you'll probably want to start with, and then as your comfort level grows, you may go direct entry into PHIMS. I usually keep the case form open just to make sure that I'm not missing anything as I do my case investigation. So I'm just going to search for my client here. So I'm going to use my left-hand nav. I'm going to search for my case. And I'm searching for this person by PIN number, so I'm going to use their health card number. I'm going to search. Okay. A lot of these cases are children. I'm just going to ignore that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select this person. So you want to make sure you have the right name and birth date. I'm going to set this person in context. And then I'm going to go to subject, because at the top of our case form, we have demographics. And so that's where I'm going to start when I'm using my workflow into PHIMS. And so I follow along the case form when I do my case investigation. I also follow along my case forms when I'm doing my entry into PHIMS. And so I'm going to start with the demographics. So under subject and client details, I'm going to go under demographics. And most of you should, remember this from your training. And so you're going to do any updating here. You're going to add additional phone numbers. So if they say, you called me on my house phone, I have a cell phone, that would work better. That's absolutely fine. You can add a phone number in.
Danielle, sorry to interrupt you. Is it possible that you enlarge your screen?
Oh, yes, of course. Let me just make sure that I can.
And Mario Line is asking if you're working off a QRC.
No, Marjoline, I am not working off a QRC because I don't work off of the QRCs. So I work based on the case investigation because I have a different comfort level with both. But certainly you are welcome to use the QRCs. There is a workflow, I believe, that's going to be sent out to you guys maybe with some of the QRCs, but all the QRCs are on the PHIMS help page for you to use to guide how to go through these steps. Okay. So I'm just going to use a mobile contact. I'm going to apply. Okay. And it's effective from today's date. I'm going to apply. And so you can see that I've worked on it. It hasn't been saved because this little, that's what that's telling me, that I haven't yet saved this. I'm going to actually mark this, set this as my preferred phone number, because this person told me this is the best number to call. So I'm going to set it as my preferred. And then when you toggle back to the top of the screen, so you can see this is my person that I'm working under, this is their case file. And as soon as I save it, so this is their old phone number that was listed for them, as soon as I save, their new preferred phone number is going to show up here, and that's how we're going to know that that's the person, that's the number to contact. And so you can see here I've changed it to preferred. If there are any edits to an address, you're going to add another address. So I'm really kind of moving through this quickly based on the assumption that you guys received this recently as part of your training. So you can add a new address. You're going to add it with, as the address type, an MHSU, so Manitoba Health Surveillance Unit. You are never going to edit the official registry. You are never going to change the preferred for an address. So the preferred is always set to the official registry, but you certainly can add additional addresses in and just date them for that day. Okay. The other important part that we're going to do under demographics is we can update the ethnicity here. Okay. This is obviously a client that I've worked under before. I should have selected a different one, but you would enter your ethnicity here as well. Okay, so at the top of your case form, you know, first name, last name, birth date, address, phone number, ethnicity. So these are all the parts of your case form that you need to update under demographics. Okay. So once I have done all of that, and it's helpful if you have both open, and that's why I work by having the case investigation open, the case forms open, and then I work in PHIMS in tandem. It is helpful certainly if you have two monitors to be able to do that. Now I'm going to enter the case for this COVID infection. So I'm going to toggle to under investigation, the first one here, subject summary. And we can see that this person has an open COVID case investigation. Okay, I guess Crystal Vandell was playing in here. Under the investigation, you're going to see this little number hyperlink, and that's what we're going to click on to take us right into the investigation. And so when we're in the investigation, now you can see we have the client in context. So we're working under a client, and then we're working under the investigation for this client. So you want to make sure that you have both open, and then you're going to start your work for your case. And so if we're looking at the case forms under investigation information, we want to make sure that this is all complete, so that this person is a case, is lab confirmed. So I believe Manitoba Health has been putting them in as lab confirmed. So that's all correct. And then we're going to continue. So this is correct. And then, so on our form, under classification of lab confirmed, we have most likely acquisition type, or the staging, and that's where we have travel acquired, close contact of a known case, or unknown. And you can see this one's already populated to unknown acquisition. You can do that in a few different spots. Where I find it easiest is under investigation quick entry. So I do like quick entry for some things. I don't like it for everything. And you're going to need to develop some familiarity with using both quick entry and the left-hand navigation functions, which are all here, and that's what they call full features. So I know we use a lot of different terms when it comes to PHIMS. Quick entry is just meant to make our lives easier. It doesn't make it easier in all ways, it does in some ways, but full features is where you're going to have to do some of your work. So I'm going to go into quick entry just here, because there are a few steps that I do in here before I move back into full features. So you could fill in your ethnicity here if you wanted to as well, if you hadn't already. And then this, if I hadn't already filled it out previously, this staging would be a blank drop down, and you would drop down and complete it with unknown acquisition for this person. Okay, and then you would hit save. And as soon as you've saved anything in Quick Entry, it's going to gray it out and you cannot make changes to it anymore from Quick Entry. You would need to exit the Quick Entry using either one of the hyperlinks here to take you where you need to go, or using the left-hand navigation. And I just want to highlight, I'm going to share my case form again just for 1 second here. Give me 1 sec. Okay, so if you have, if you're wondering where you need to go to be able to enter some of the information, you want to follow the cookie crumbs or the breadcrumbs, whatever you want to call them, crumbs. They're here under each section. They will tell you how to navigate in PHIMS to be able to enter that information. So they're here. And so just make sure if you don't know where you're going to be able to enter that information, just follow your cookie crumbs and they'll tell you where you need to go. Okay. And so now that, you know, staging is complete, it's all grayed out, we've saved it. The next thing I'm going to move on to is signs or symptoms, and that just happens to be the next thing on our case investigation form. There are changes coming to PHIMS soon that will make it more consistent with the flow of the case investigation form, just to, you know, facilitate doing both. So it will mirror more closely what we see on our form is what you'll see in PHIMS to be able to follow your flow a little bit better. But what you can do is, so I will click off, you know, the different symptoms that somebody might have had. So chills, cough, fever, say some muscle pains. And this is the beauty of using a quick entry. You can set the response for a bunch of them all at once. So we're going to batch and we can say yes. Okay. You don't have to put a date for all of them necessarily. Especially if they all fell on different days, if you know that they all fell on different days, but you can apply the yes to all of them. Okay. You can fill out a symptom onset date for them. You don't have to, but where you do have to is you have to click off symptomatic or asymptomatic. And if you look at your case investigation forms under number 4, signs and symptoms, it specifically asks you asymptomatic, symptomatic, and the date. And so we do need to include the signs and symptoms are not dated. They're either a yes or a no on the case investigation form, but the symptomatic and asymptomatic are dated. And so you do need to click off one or the other and date it. So I'm going to say yes to symptomatic, and I am going to date it for, say, October 14th, because that seems to be my favorite date. Okay. So once I've made sure that I have those there, I am going to save it, and you'll see how these are going to gray out once I've saved it. Okay, and so now I can't make any other changes to these signs or symptoms unless I exit using the full feature, and at each section in the quick entry will tell you here and provide you a little hyperlink of how to get to the full features. To make any changes. I just want to point out that any symptoms that are not included on the case investigation form, so anything that would be considered other, so fatigue, loss of taste or smell, some of those other ones, are not included on this list. This list is exactly reflective of what's on the case investigation form. And so if you do have other symptoms, and I will click here because we're going to have to add, say, fatigue. And so I'm going to add my sign or symptom of fatigue. And I'm not going to date it. It's yes for present. I'm going to add it. Okay. So you can see fatigue has been entered, and I'm going to save it. Okay. And then I continue to follow. So once I've entered all my symptoms, I'm going to follow along my case form. And next on your case form is going to be your risk factors. And I'm going to go back to my quick entry because quick entry allows me to batch for a few things. It allows me to batch responses for signs and symptoms. And then risk factors is the next one. And so what I usually do, most of them are no, and occasionally we have some yeses. So I usually select all, and then I just deselect whatever is yes. So say they had, you know, they were part of an outbreak, or they worked in a sensitive environment, I might leave those as blank. And the other ones, I'm going to set a response to no for all of them. So that's the nice part, is to be able to do this. Okay. I'm going to apply. And so now you can see all of these are no's, and then say this outbreak is yes. I'm going to have to toggle this to yes. And anytime you answer yes in this table, you're going to have to provide extra information. So say, oops, like we had talked about. John Richard. And my outbreak code that I had used on my form, CL20. And then I'm just going to use no for sensitive environment just to keep my work easy now, but if you wanted a yes there, you could as well. Okay. So anytime you answer yes, you're going to have to fill in the additional information box. Okay, I'm going to save, and once you save again, it's going to lock all this information. If you need to make any changes, you have to move out the full feature risk factors, which you can access here. My computer's a little bit slow. Okay, I just want to point out those same things can be accessed, you know, using the left-hand navigation. So risk factors are here under the subject, and then a bunch of these, so signs and symptoms. These are all in the left-hand navigation as well if you're more comfortable accessing it that way, but you absolutely can use the hyperlinks in the quick entry. Okay, and then the other thing that you can batch is your interventions. And so I often will skip over my exposures, my acquisition and transmission, and I will just move straight into intervention, so I can do as much of my batching as I can before I move on to some of the work of adding the transmission and acquisition exposure. This person, I'm just trying to remember what I put on my form here. So I would use isolation, that this person is under home isolation. So their outcome, this person is not done their isolation yet, so it's pending. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. The disposition is going to be in progress. So they are currently going to be, they are isolating, they are in progress of isolating, and so their start date is today. Now let's just see here. So say this person hasn't been isolating until today, you could use today's date. If this person started isolating the day of their symptom onset, so say the 14th, you could put that there. I want to highlight this is not an end date box here. So people will often put in the end date here. It is not the end date. This is a follow-up date. We're not going to use this. So we're going to use our home isolation here. We're going to do the start date. And then we're going to start our status assessment for home isolation. So this person, same thing, is pending. And I don't end date their status assessment because it's an update of their assessment. I will only end date it when they are complete in their isolation. So it's in progress, and they started their isolation on the 14th. Okay, and I'm going to save. Now, again, I'm going to have to exit out of quick entry in order to end date this. And these are some of the things that we don't like about quick entry, and why some people will use just the full feature by automatically using the left-hand navigation to go into this section, because they don't like having to exit out of quick entry all the time to make changes. So it's whatever you're comfortable with. To add an end date, you're going to click on isolation, on the hyperlink, and then here it asks for the end date, and you're going to end date it here. So based on the information here, we're going to end date it for the 24th, and then we're going to save. And this information has to be complete in order for the call center to do their work. So you need to have a start and end date for their isolation. Okay, and so that's really, I'm pretty sure that's the extent of quick entry for what I use it for. Because everything else you need to exit quick entry to fill it out. There are clinical notes here. So at the end of your kind of data entry side of things, you are going to write your notes. So that is a requirement. And I mean, I've used a lot of notes I've had where I needed a doorstop visit done by a community area nurse. And so I communicated with them, and then I received a phone call back. And so all of those are going to go into clinical notes, just as you would do in IFIS. The problem with the quick entry is that you can only enter this in once, and then whatever your last note is going to populate this, and then you have to exit into clinical notes to continue to write additional notes. So I don't really like using it here. You can access clinical notes by using the hyperlink there, or at the very bottom on your left-hand navigation here, there's notes, and you can do that as well. Once there's been a note written, everybody should be familiar with that little yellow triangle that shows up at the top of your page, and you can click on that as well to see the notes for this investigation. So once I've completed, what I can with the quick entry, I'm going to move into adding my acquisition and transmission events, and this is where things get a little bit tricky. I'm going to go into my exposure summary. And so this is what we call the full feature. So you can see left-hand navigation, we're under exposure summary. So either way to access this is fine. And so I'm going to use just what I wrote in my form. And so it is super helpful if you use the digital form and you're filling it out kind of as you go. You absolutely can copy and paste some of your information into PHIMS to save you a bit of time. And so based on what I had written in my case forms, I'm going to create an acquisition event. And so I'm going to name it household. Okay. And then there's a whole lot of chevrons and blue banners that can be expanded for additional information. We're actually not going to use most of it. So we're just going to name it household. I'm going to put the dates that I included on my case investigation form. So I'm going to use, from September 30th, which was my date that I had used. And don't worry about the dates that I'm using right now. They don't have to be consistent. It's just for demonstration purposes. And so to the 13th with my acquisition period. And then what we are going to expand is this exposure location, and I'm going to show you why. So exposure location, under exposure location name, this is where we want the details of the exposure, whether it's acquisition or transmission, and I'll show you why in a second. So I am going to copy my information from my acquisition on my page, and I'm going to paste it into PHIMS. So household, lives with partner and 2 kids, and any other details that you might have. If you know the address and want to populate it here, that's fine. For a household setting, I wouldn't. But if, say, it's a workplace and you know that they work at Earls on Main and you have the specific address, absolutely fill that in. That's great. So I'm going to save this. And then once it is saved, so you can see here the little yellow banner, acquisition is successfully saved, I'm going to cancel. And canceling is just going to take me back to my exposure summary page. Okay, and you can see here in my factory table, the acquisition event's been created, and this is why it's super important to put those details under the exposure setting, okay? Because that's how it's going to show up in this factory table. If you put this information at the top, so I'm going to create an additional acquisition. If I put all of my details here, it's not going to show up in that factory table, and all we're going to have is numbers and none of the details. And we really want to be able to glean at a quick glance what the information is. And so my next exposure name might be workplace. Oops, if I could spell that might help. Okay. And then I'm going to start and end date it. Okay. And then again, I'm going to use my copy and paste function, which I find is super helpful, to put in my details from the workplace. Okay, there is a limit to the characters. I believe it's 225 if I remember correctly from Robert for this text box. So you may need to, abbreviate or shorten some of what you've put in there. But generally speaking, you have a fair bit of room to put details in there. And then if I knew the address, I would put it in. And I'm going to, so you can, oh, pardon me. You should also use this exposure setting type. And so we are supposed to be using type of community contact. And so same as on the form, there's either travel, community contact, household, or close non-household, okay? And so this person didn't really have, you could use like close non-household for workplace setting or household for family members, and that's fine. So we're going to mirror what's the information on our case investigation form, and I'm going to save. And then when we go back to my factory table, you can see here again, all of that detail is there. And when you hover over it, you can see the full details that I put in there, which is super important. Okay. So now that I've created my acquisition events, I'm going to move on and create my transmission events. Okay. So it looks very similar. I'm going to put household. Okay. And the start and end date. Okay. And then again, exposure location, we're going to want to extend, and we're going to put all of our details in here. So household. I don't really have a lot of details. Household is pretty straightforward. Our exposure setting type is going to be type of community contact, and we're going to use household. Okay. Now let me just see here. So as you may or may not be aware, you cannot add known contacts until after you hit save. So there's unknown contacts here that you can drop down, but you can't add any known until you save. So once I save, that known contact box will pop up. So if I scroll down here now, you can see there's known contact search. So you have to save the transmission event in order to be able to add known contacts. As if you are completing your own initial contact notification, you are going to get their information and add them as known contacts. If you were enlisting the help of some of your colleagues to do initial contact notification, you might add an unknown contact, and then they can pick up that piece of work and convert them to a known contact. But I'm just going to do some known contacts. Let's start with that. And so say this is a household contact, which is fine. I'm going to add a client. So I'm going to search by client. Okay. And so it kind of kicks me out of the investigation. That's okay. We didn't lose anything. We're still okay. So we're going to search by their PHIN number or name and birth date or whatever information you have for them. Okay, and we're going to search for them. All right, so I have the right person. I verified their name and their birth date. I have the right one. I'm going to select this person, and select and return is what we want to do. And that's going to take us back into our transmission event. And you can see now Pamela Cardinal is here. But what we can't forget to do is to add this person into our transmission event. So don't forget to add. People will just save without adding, and then that person is not included in your transmission event. And so this is what's automatically going to pop up. And the reason for this is, so where it says Pamela Cardinal, because we're creating an investigation. So anytime you're adding your contact to a case, we're creating a contact investigation for this person. So they've been named as a contact. So there are a few things you need to fill out. Okay. So their disposition is pending. If we've done their contact notification, we can change it to follow up in progress. If we want to flag it for another person that they're going to be doing the contact notification, you can leave it as pending. But I'm going to change it to follow up in progress because I'm the person that's working on this. And then I'm going to assign the responsible work group. Okay, CD Winnipeg Health. You can assign yourself as the investigator for that contact if you're the one that is doing the contact notification. So you guys should be familiar with this. And then we're going to scroll down, and you always have to have a reporting source. And we always just use, source case or named by case or whatever you want to include in there. Okay. And it automatically defaults to today, and we're going to submit. So that's going to create a contact investigation for that person. And now when you scroll down, you can see that this person is linked under the acquisition event, and they're considered a contact. Okay, and then we're going to still have to save. Okay. So you can continue to add clients and create contact investigations for them, and that's fine. Unknown contacts, we can put Bob Barker in here. Oops. add any contact information that we have for him. Then we're going to leave the disposition as pending, because if this is an unknown contact, I'm assuming we haven't been able to get a hold of him yet, or we are enlisting the help of somebody else in the office who's going to pick up this, going to go into this case and do some of the ICN for us. And so we're going to leave it as pending, and we're going to add this person. Okay, and so you can see under unknown, so we have a known contact, we have an unknown, and I know it doesn't make a lot of sense to have unknown in a household setting, but we do have that situations like that as well, where they're living in the basement and there are people living upstairs and they do have some contact, but they don't know the person's full name or that kind of thing. So that does happen. And so we've added some known and unknown, and you want to make sure that you save. Okay. And so I'm just, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through a ton more. What I do want to highlight, so we have our acquisition and our transmission. I like to go using my left-hand navigation to investigation summary. So this is where I make sure that I completed everything that I needed to do. Okay, I did use the outbreak of John Pritchard, and I do want to highlight, because we received those documents, and Mandy from the EPI team wanted to really highlight the important parts of where you're going to include an outbreak code. So I'm just going to toggle there quickly before we finish here. So you can include it under the outbreak for risk factors, but the primary place that they want that is under your disease summary. And so you can see the disease summary where it says lab confirmed, and we have all of this. We're going to update. And when you scroll down, there's a provincial outbreak code box, and this is where they want it. So if you have somebody that is part of an outbreak, this is the first place that you need to have it. The under outbreak associated is important too, but this is their primary place that they would like it, and then you save. Okay, so when I go back to my investigation summary, you can see that the provincial outbreak code is in there. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll down, and this is how I verify my work. So I look under each one to make sure that everything is in there accurately. So it's an unknown acquisition, it's lab confirmed, I have my outbreak code in there. Some of these are not applicable to COVID, which is fine. So my signs and symptoms are in there, my symptomatic onset date is in there, that's perfect. The lab is in there, so if you need any of the lab information, there's an accession number, so that's where you would get it from under the lab. You can also access the lab in the labs using the left-hand navigation to the lab summary, but I really like this investigation summary because it gives you a complete picture, and this is where the CD coordinators are going to come to access your information from the case. And then I continue to go down. A lot of these, like I said, are not applicable to COVID. Your interventions are here, so your isolation start and end dates are here. Your status assessment for home isolation is here. Once they've completed it, you would update it with an end date. And then their transmission and acquisition events are in here. And as you can see, all of that detail that we're looking for is there. Their risk factors are here. And I'm just going to see if there's anything else. So there's not. So that's how I really verify my work to make sure that I've entered everything from the case form. And I think it's going to take you some time in the beginning to make sure that you've covered everything that you need to, and that's okay. But I really like to use this investigation summary page to make sure that I've done what I needed to. Now, there are tons of complex situations when it comes to adding contacts that already are cases or any of those intricacies. We are trying to work through some of those situations and get some guidance from the PHIMS team and from Manitoba Health EPI in order to be able to do this work, efficiently, effectively, and consistently. And so we're hoping to be able to provide some communication around some different ways to be able to do it. If you do have questions related to entry into PHIMS, certainly you can reach out to the PHIMS team for some support. And if you have some of those, those questions, definitely reach out to them. But we are already working on some of those things. I can't cover everything in a teaching session, and this was just meant to be a little bit of a review of how to enter, or how I would go through the workflow of entering after completing my case investigation. Okay. So I'm happy to answer any other questions. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but if there are other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Danielle. There are a few questions that have come up in the text box, and I'm seeing even more coming up now. I can go ahead and read those questions if everybody's okay to stay for a little bit. I know we had ended the meeting at 3:30 and it's 3:30 now. So feel free to log off if you guys don't have time, but I think we'll go ahead and answer some of the questions in the text box if that's okay with you, Danielle.
Sure.
Okay. I think some of them you've answered as we've been going through. So I'm just going to scroll back up. I think you answered the question about other symptoms that Angie had posed.
Yep.
Eliza's asked, do we not care when each of the symptoms started?
We do, and if you have that information, absolutely, you can go in and date each one based on when their symptoms started. The minimum requirement is that you have symptomatic or asymptomatic, and the start or end date for that, or the start date for that. So absolutely, if you have that information, go ahead and put that in there. But if you don't, or the person was unsure, the minimum that you have to have is whether they were symptomatic and the onset date for that.
Okay, sorry. Will they be changing that to end date instead of follow-up date? I think, I'm not sure.
I believe so as part of the off patch, but I can't say for certain. I guess we'll find out when it comes through.
Okay. Ria's asking if do we not need to be adding information for the investigator? I'm not sure if Ria wants to expand on that question.
Investigator, hold on. Hold on 1 second. I'm just going to pull up my transmission event. Okay. So it doesn't require it. To be honest, I haven't been assigning myself to the transmission event. I'm assigned as primary for the case themselves. Where we would have been using transmission event investigator information is we would have been assigning the transmission event. That was part of our conversation about unknown contacts and how to get that out to community areas for initial contact notification. I don't know if we need to be doing it otherwise. I can ask and get back to you about it, but we haven't been because we assign the case to ourselves, and then if it's going out for contact notification, another PHN is assigned as the secondary.
Does that answer that question? Yeah, okay, great, thanks, Ria. Lots of questions asking about the difference, clarifying the differences between transmission and acquisition events, and lots of comments regarding that. If you want to just review that one more time for us, Danielle?
Sure. So I really want to try to use consistent terminology with what PHIMS uses. IFIS was different, so obviously incubation and communication or communicability is what we used in IFIS. I really want to try to use terminology that's consistent with PHIMS. So acquisition is the period during which you could have acquired it. So the 2 weeks prior to your symptom onset. Transmission is when you could transmit it to other people, so your period of infectiousness. And I don't know if you guys need me to review the dates again for that, but that's all clear in the interim guidance document as well.
Great. We have a question about, are we doing the contact notification on the case investigations we receive? Did you want to take that one, Danielle, or did you want me to attempt it?
I believe the communication that's gone out so far to the nurses that are already doing this work in the community area was to try to enlist the support of their team members that might have capacity to help with initial contact notification. I hope you guys can all appreciate everything is changing very rapidly, and so that direction may change, and you're responsible for your own ICN. That direction will have to come from, Debbie and Claire and people that are in positions that aren't me.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it as well, Danielle, that we want to focus on doing the initial case notifications and the case investigations. And then that's my understanding too, that to rely on your team members that have had the experience doing the contact tracing for that function. Just scrolling down here, seeing if there's anything else. Are we sending all cases and contacts to the call center for ADMs? As asked.
Yeah, we are at this point until which time the call center tells us that they don't have capacity to take cases. So for the time being, we are able to send all cases and contacts to the call center for ADM.
Great. Michelle is asking, in the intervention summary, what is the difference between the status assessment isolation and just straight isolation? Why do you need both in the interventions?
I'm going to defer back to the case investigation forms. That's the way that they are set up. So one is an intervention. So we are, letting them know that they need to isolate for the 14 days. The other is an assessment of their status. So they have begun their isolation on this day. I'm going to end date it once, they have completed their isolation. And then I would actually also provide a status assessment of recovered at that point. So it's just any changes. If there was a hospitalization, you would provide a status assessment of hospitalization. So they are two kind of different things. I know it seems redundant, but their function is a little bit different.
Okay. Sonia is asking, is the form now just for the interview? Yes, it is, Sonia. Is it sent anywhere? No, it's not. Kept for reference, workflow, or shredded. It's just used, my understanding, Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong, is it's used to gather the information and then input that information into PHIMS. That
is correct, yeah. So you can keep it for your reference if you'd like to for a while. We have plenty of copies here, but I have done some direct entries these last couple of days and I haven't done any forms at all. So, which is okay too. It just depends on your preference.
Nicole is asking, how do we close the case and what do we do in PHIMS if they are hospitalized?
So if they are hospitalized, so after you've done your initial case investigation, I'm thinking that's what you're asking, you would provide a status assessment. So that's what we're just talking about. And that would be under your interventions. So you can either go to your quick entry, and I can show you that. I'm going to leave this page. If that's where you're comfortable, like you starting your work and continuing your work, you're absolutely welcome to do that there. So here we go. And so this is where you would provide a status assessment of hospitalization. You can see it's here. We can't do it from here because it's grayed out, right? Because you can't do any more in quick entry, but you can absolutely click on your hyperlink here and that will take you to the full features, which you can also access here through the left-hand navigation. You can see it's highlighted here. And what you're going to do is create an intervention. And your intervention type is going to be, where is it? I haven't had to enter a hospitalization in here, so bear with me. Why am I not seeing it, guys? Assessment. And then, nope, picking the wrong one, guys. Status assessment, sorry guys, status assessment. And then we're going to choose hospitalization. Our outcome, so anything with the red star you have to fill out is pending. And so we would put the start date of hospitalization, and then you're going to save it there, and then you would document in your notes that this client is hospitalized.
All right, there's a few questions here around the call center.
Yeah.
And the questions are around, can we check in PHIMS if the call center has been in touch with the case? How does the call center alert you to close the case?
So absolutely, you can check where the call center has been in touch with a case, and where they do that is kind of a silly spot, but it's under interventions, under isolation. So how they document their contacts is by clicking on the isolation, and they add a follow-up. And so I'm going to do one just so you can see that this is where they would document. So they document a follow-up type of telephone. They would put today's date that they made a telephone call, they completed that disposition, let's just say, and did this person have symptoms? I'm going to say no. And that's pretty simply what they do. They might add a comment in here. They don't use any of this recurrence part as far as I'm aware, and then they would save. And so when I go back to my intervention summary, you can see here under isolation, when you click on the little plus sign here, you can see that a phone call was made and it was completed, and you can click on the hyperlink to see any additional details that they might have provided. And I can't remember what the second question was related to the call center.
How does the call center alert you to close the case?
So the call center will close the cases once they have completed their ADMs, as far as I'm aware. They have been closing contact investigations as well.
So it won't come back to you to close, they'll close it?
No.
Great. I think Karen Strom had her hand up at one point. Karen, did you want to chime in here?
Hi, no, hi, it's Karen. I was just asking what we're talking about. So after it goes to the call center, that's it? We don't have any more contact with them? Like if there's a problem, will they get in touch with us? Will they enter, for example, if the client is hospitalized?
So I can't speak specifically to what their workflow is that would determine what comes back to us. They do have like nursing support staff on at the call center to support those phone calls. So if there are health concerns, how to direct them. But certainly if there's something that they need to flag us for, they would do that through PHIMS. I haven't had that happen through PHIMS, so I can't speak to how they would flag us. Maybe I can check with Debbie about their workflow. I'm not, obviously we haven't been using PHIMS for very long to know how they would go about sending that back to us for our attention. But they do have processes in place to deal with, any health concerns and that kind of thing. I can't speak to whether they would document hospitalization. They probably wouldn't in the same way that we would, because they are taught, the very basic kinds of things about how to do that follow-up for ADM. And then I actually believe it's some of the nurses that do the closing after the fact, so it's not the call center representatives that do. And so, I mean, maybe that's a question for somebody else. I don't know that I can answer it accurately for you.
Lots of comments on how helpful the training's been. So I want to thank you once again, Danielle, for doing this training for us and for walking us through it. I mean, you have a ton of experience with this, and I think it's just nice to be able to get the walkthrough and to see firsthand how it actually works and how you use the forms to enter the information into PHIMS.